The lights inside Lowell Hall were perfect. The banners read "Common Ground for a New America." Harvard's best sat in pressed suits and curated rows. And on stage, President Obama's voice filled the space with elegance and order. But 12 rows back, a man in a worn jacket stood up. No name card.
No invite.
No applause. In his hand, an envelope. Stained. Bent. Stamped with 3 quiet words, "Return to sender blocked." That's when the system began to blink. If truth still matters to you, subscribe. We don't curate what you're allowed to think. The lights inside Lowell Hall at Harvard were balanced to perfection. Soft amber on the stage, cooler shadows blanketing the audience. 2 cameras tracked slowly from the side aisles, capturing former President Barack Obama standing behind the mahogany podium mid-sentence. And unity, true unity, does not require uniformity. It requires intention. A wave of nods rippled through the first few rows. One student mouthed along with him. Phones were raised. Someone near the back tapped "Goosebumps" in a TikTok live comment. Then, it happened. Row G, seat 14. No name placard.
No credentials.
Just a man in a charcoal jacket rising silently to his feet. Arnold Schwarzenegger, 68 years old, unscheduled, unlisted. He wasn't looking at the stage. In his right hand, slightly tilted forward, he held a worn brown envelope. The corner was creased. A diagonal shoe mark streaked across the back, dried and faint, but visible. On the front, half-faded blue ink stamped over the address, "Return to sender blocked." Not torn. Not opened. Rejected. Intact. Carried in. A few heads turned, unsure whether to stand down or alert staff. The moderators in the wings didn't move. But one of them, a young assistant in black slacks, tapping rapidly on her iPad just moments ago, froze mid-gesture. Her eyes locked on the envelope. Then on the man holding it. Then back to the iPad. Her fingers hovered above the screen but didn't land. She looked up, scanned the tech booth. No cue lights. Just the faint red glow of the live indicator blinking on the center camera. Arnold didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply stepped out into the center aisle, holding the envelope like a misplaced artifact, not threatening, but undeniable. Obama, unaware, continued on stage. "We must build platforms for voices, not barricades against discomfort." But already, something had shifted. Not a protest. Not a shout. Just a question, spreading wordlessly through the hall. What's in that envelope, and why is it here? From the tech booth, someone leaned forward. In the 5th row, a student lowered her phone, not out of disinterest, but instinct. The stage remained bright. But now, so did the space around Arnold. The architecture of control, lights, lists, lenses, had not broken. It had merely tilted. And in the silence of a single man walking forward with a marked envelope that no one approved, the system blinked first. The words stopped mid-sentence. Barack Obama, still at the podium, glanced stage left. His expression didn't break, but his cadence did. In the quiet hum of the room, it was barely audible, just the subtle shift of a former president no longer reading the room, but checking it. His gaze locked onto someone behind the curtains. A woman in a gray headset stepped forward, leaned in toward a clipboard-wielding man from Harvard Events. No audio carried, but the body language did. The clipboard man nodded once, then mouthed 2 words. "Not registered." Obama turned back to the audience. The change in atmosphere was imperceptible to most, but not to those watching closely. His shoulders were now squared. His next words came with a deliberate coolness. "Sir." A pause. Arnold had taken only 4 steps down the central aisle. He wasn't rushing. The envelope was still in his hand, angled just slightly downward, its bootprint now catching more light than it had a moment earlier. This is a curated space. He let that hang, as if it explained everything. Then he continued, still calm, still measured, "We welcome dialogue that builds, not distracts." The crowd didn't murmur. They absorbed. It wasn't loudness that signaled tension. It was how quiet it got. A student in row C clicked their pen 3 times in succession, then stopped abruptly. Another, tapping notes on a laptop, glanced up and pressed the spacebar, pausing the recording. A third, just behind Arnold's trajectory, leaned forward, fingers tented near her lips. On the main screen above the stage, the event slogan glowed behind Obama, Open Voices Harvard Series, but the camera's iris adjusted too slowly. For a moment, the projector beam flared into the lens, blurring the words into a white glare, unreadable. That's when a quiet tap echoed from row F. 1, 2, 3. Fingernails on polished wood. A student in a forest green sweater, arms crossed tightly, was rhythmically tapping his index finger on the surface of his desk. Not loud. Not angry. Just restrained. Arnold still hadn't said a word. His steps slowed as he approached the edge of the lower risers, now parallel with the front row. The envelope in his hand moved slightly, more from the subtle pressure of his thumb than any gesture. He wasn't holding it up. But he wasn't hiding it either. Obama stayed composed. I know this may be unexpected, he said, voice steady. But we have a process. We inform, we invite, we vet. Then, with emphasis, without raising his voice, we curate. The word hit like a sealed stamp. Not shouted, but absolute. A term once used for museums and art galleries, now applied to voices. Across the room, a professor sitting near the right aisle crossed one leg over the other and adjusted his glasses. His eyes did not leave the envelope. Onstage, Obama glanced briefly at the monitor screen facing the podium, showing the real-time broadcast feed. He noted how tightly the cameras had zoomed. Then looked back at Arnold. Then the audience. Let's not allow spectacle to undermine purpose. Another pause. But now the imbalance had grown visible. The assistant with the iPad, who had frozen moments earlier in Chapter 1, was now subtly scrolling back through her calendar, trying to verify whether any unofficial invite was ever logged. No one had interrupted. No voices had risen. But the air had thickened. A student live streaming near the back whispered faintly to her friend, "Why does that envelope feel louder than the MEC?" Arnold looked up at the stage for the first time. Not hostile. Just there. His mouth didn't open. His eyes said nothing. But his presence, his refusal to step out of frame, was now a confrontation in and of itself. Obama's fingers touched the side of the lectern. He gave a diplomatic half-smile, the kind he'd used through hundreds of town halls. But even the smile felt rehearsed this time. Because it had to. The tension wasn't between two men. It was between a live script and an uninvited envelope that kept existing. And somewhere in the middle, the word curated, once meant to suggest care, was beginning to sound like something else. A choice. A filter. A lock. And for the first time in the night, the audience wasn't sure who held the key. The microphone clicked on, soft, mechanical, unmistakable. A second tone rang out from the speakers, subtle but distinct. Not feedback. Just presence. Arnold stood just past the front row now, eyes level with the moderators.
No teleprompter. No ambetaschen.
Only a voice stepping through a door that was never meant to open. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't lean into the mic. "They invited me," he began, low and clear. A few students turned toward the back automatically, assuming he meant organizers. But none of the hosts on stage moved. "But I wasn't filtered properly, I guess." The line landed lightly.
No anger. No sarcasm.
Just a dry statement, one that made a handful of students in the side rows shift in their seats. Then he turned his head. Slowly. Stage left. Toward the very back row, Section D. 3 empty chairs. One of them had something sitting beside it, a navy backpack, zipped, clean, untouched. The camera crew didn't need direction. They instinctively cut to it, zooming in slowly like it was a character in the room. No one sat beside the bag. No jacket.
No laptop.
No water bottle. Just the bag itself. Present. But denied entry. Arnold gestured with only his gaze. Maybe that's unity, too. If you're not here, you're safer. No one laughed. No one clapped. But an uncomfortable silence stretched across the room. In the second row, a female student pressed her pen down against a notebook without writing, just enough to create a faint groove in the page. On the far left, a student with wireless earbuds took one out. It wasn't noise that filled the room now. It was implication. This wasn't just about Arnold. This was about someone who was supposed to be there, but wasn't. A name unspoken. A voice unseen. But a seat left open, deliberately or not, it didn't matter now. On stage, one of the hosts glanced toward the moderator's table, clearly registering the shift. A producer in the shadows shook his head subtly, as if trying to will the camera back to the speaker's podium. But it was too late. The audience had already seen what they weren't supposed to see. The unoccupied chair. The sealed backpack. The imprint of exclusion without announcement. Arnold didn't move. Didn't fill the silence. He let it stretch. The longer he stood still, the more the architecture of the event began to feel off balance. Obama remained at the podium. Calm. Measured. Still. But behind him, the event banner on the wall, Harvard Common Ground Series, now framed Arnold and the empty seat in the same camera line. The phrase common ground caught between two people, one who controlled the MIC and one who hadn't been offered it. In the third row, a male student quietly lowered his phone, stopped live streaming. Not because he disapproved. Because he couldn't explain what he was filming anymore. Arnold shifted his weight slightly, the envelope still at his side. Still unopened. Still bearing the dirt-smudged stamp. Returned to sender blocked. He looked back at the crowd, then spoke again, softer this time. I was told it wasn't the right format. That honesty needs formatting now. One chuckle escaped near the media booth. Not loud, but sharp. Someone nearby elbowed the chuckler, and it stopped just as quickly. A student near the side wall, arms crossed, whispered to herself, "He's not just talking about himself." The message was clear. Arnold wasn't fighting to be heard. He was fighting for the absence to be seen. A kind of reverse protest, not a demand for stage time, but a demand for acknowledgement of who was denied entry altogether. And for the first time in the evening, the curation felt exposed. Not angry. Not malicious. Just visible. And that alone was dangerous. Arnold didn't call out names. Didn't invoke politics. Didn't raise his voice. He simply made the audience look at the space where a voice was missing, and left it unnamed. Because sometimes, the system doesn't need to silence people loudly. It just needs them not to show up. And all it takes to undo that script is someone willing to point a camera at the chair. For a long moment, Arnold didn't move. The envelope was still in his hand, creased, dirt-marked, and now clearly visible to the cameras. The stage lights caught it from an angle, making the blue stamp shimmer faintly in the air-conditioned stillness. Returned to sender blocked. But then came the second movement. He reached inside. Slowly. As if pulling out not a piece of paper, but something heavier. More delicate. More dangerous. Out came a standard sheet of printer paper, folded once down the middle, then flattened again. The corners were bent. The center had been highlighted once, then crossed out with a thick red line, twice. The room didn't know what it was. Not yet. But it knew how it made people feel. Arnold held it up, not above his head, not like a weapon. Just in front of his chest, angled toward the crowd. His fingers gripped the edges tight. And they were trembling. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just enough that the paper fluttered in the downwash of the overhead lights. Just enough that the muscle in his right forearm tightened, visibly, under the sleeve. The camera captured it, a man's hand shaking not out of fear, but restraint. The spotlight from the catwalk hit him at an angle, casting a faint gleam along his wrist. The veins on the back of his hand stood out like ridges on a road map. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This, Arnold said, holding the paper still, was the original request. He turned the page slightly, enough for the first two lines to become readable on the big screen behind the stage. Not all of it. But two words stood out in bold. Speaker request campus discussion series. Then, a third line, marked in red block print, almost stamped diagonally across the text, rejected risk to narrative stability. A low murmur broke from the left wing of the room. Someone coughed, loudly, and then nothing. Arnold let the page drop a little, but not out of view. He looked down. Not at the floor, but at the bottom corner of the paper. His thumb brushed lightly against it, revealing a handwritten note. The letters were messy, uneven, clearly not typed. "Please, don't let them erase us again." The word erase had been underlined, twice. Once in pen. Once, faintly, in pencil. The student cameras caught it, zoomed in, paused. In the third row, a girl holding her phone upright slowly, lowered it. Not because security said so. Not because she was afraid. But because it no longer felt right to watch. Some moments aren't meant for screens. On stage, Obama didn't interrupt. His eyes were locked on Arnold's hand. Not his face. Not the paper. The hand. The tremble. The effort to stay steady. Because what was being held wasn't just a document. It was proof of a line that had been crossed, and then crossed out. Arnold spoke again, barely louder than a whisper into the embassy. They said this might disrupt the tone of the evening. He glanced sideways. But sometimes, the tone needs disrupting. He folded the paper once, slowly, and held it in both hands, not to hide it, but to hold it together. In the media box, one of the broadcast producers leaned into their headset mic and whispered, "Don't cut. Don't pan." The main screen remained locked on Arnold's hands. The audience didn't need to see his face. The truth wasn't in his expression. It was in his grip. The auditorium wasn't silent now. It was constrained. People wanted to speak. Some wanted to cheer. Others wanted to object. But the room had shifted into a new register, one where accusation had been replaced by ache. And ache, when real, has its own authority. In the back corner, a student with a Yale hoodie turned to her friend and said, "That paper looks like something I wrote last semester." Almost the same words. The friend didn't respond. On stage, Arnold looked back toward Obama. He didn't challenge him. He just nodded. Once. Not in respect. Not in agreement. But in acknowledgement that now, they both stood in a room where silence had become impossible. And then, quietly, he slid the paper back into the envelope. But not all the way. Just enough for the edges to stick out, visible, vulnerable. Irased. For nearly 40 minutes, everything had gone according to plan. The event began on time. The lights had been set to contrast Obama's dark suit against a crimson Harvard backdrop. The moderator questions were pre-cleared. The seating chart had been signed off that morning. The camera angles locked, the transitions timed. Even the Twitter hashtag had begun trending mid-speech, #UnityAtHarvard. But now, none of it was running on script. Arnold still stood at the base of the auditorium steps, one hand at his side holding the envelope, the other resting loosely near the mic. His voice, though untrained for oratory, had shifted the room's emotional frequency. The paper he had just displayed, the one with the red stamp and the handwritten plea, was tucked only half back into the envelope. Its torn edge fluttered slightly in the faint AC breeze. And Barack Obama, center stage, flanked by silence, was preparing to act. He took a step forward. His hand rose slightly, palm downward, fingers relaxed. Not a commanding gesture. A transition cue. One used hundreds of times before. Backstage, the assistant stage manager saw it and lifted his headset mic. The plan was clear: fade the room lights 10%, shift the camera feed back to the main podium, cut the floor mic Arnold had been using. A smooth pivot. Reclaim the narrative. Control the atmosphere. But then, mid-gesture, Arnold spoke. If truth interrupts your show, his tone was not combative. It was almost conversational. But the room heard it differently. Obama's hand, still in mid-air, stilled. Maybe the truth isn't the problem. It wasn't the volume that made the line land. It was the timing. The sentence dropped like a flat note in a symphony. It didn't clash. It cancelled. A silence followed, not the respectful kind, but the off-script kind. And slowly, visibly, Obama's hand began to lower. Not snapped back. Just lowered. Cameras caught it from two angles. The right side broadcast cam framed Obama's face in profile. The Steadicam from aisle 4 caught the hand itself, drifting back toward his side. The same hand that once signed executive orders now retracted, not in defeat, but in hesitance. The technician in the booth didn't trigger the transition. The stage manager didn't cue the light shift. They waited. And the system, built to obey subtle commands, did not move. In the front row, a student turned her head sharply to the left, searching for facial cues from her peers. Is this where we clap? No one responded. 2 seats down, a young man with a blue folder raised his eyebrows but didn't speak. The silence stretched just wide enough for doubt to seep in. The producer in the control room mouthed, "Do we cut?" No one answered. Obama, still composed, let the moment settle. His eyes, controlled, sharp, held Arnold's for a beat. But his shoulders had shifted slightly forward now. Not slouched. Just not set. The posture of someone recalculating. Arnold didn't press. He let the silence do the work. Because in that one line, maybe the truth isn't the problem, he hadn't accused. He had redirected. He hadn't attacked the rules. He had named their consequences. And that was far harder to deflect. From the mezzanine seats, a student with a digital notepad wrote one word and circled it. Pause. Near the tech pit, a young volunteer in a Harvard badge whispered to herself, they didn't see that coming. No one had. Not because it was provocative, but because it wasn't. There was no chant.
No anger.
No righteous crescendo. Just a man pointing out that interruptions aren't always disruptions. Sometimes they're corrections. And that idea, that the truth might be louder than the script, was a virus the system had no vaccine for. Obama cleared his throat softly. It wasn't a stall, it was real. His voice, when it returned, carried the same cadence. But something behind the eyes had shifted. Not shaken. Just held back. As if the speech that came next would now be said despite the moment, not above it. And in row G, a group of students who had prepared a standing ovation for the final segment of the speech now sat frozen, unsure what they were applauding anymore. The envelope remained in Arnold's hand, creased, slightly open, its contents half exposed like a wound the room had seen and no one dared to suture. He hadn't moved from the edge of the stage steps. No elevation. No spotlight. Just a man holding position in the soft glow of the auditorium's ambient lights. He adjusted the microphone, not with haste, but with the control of someone who knew this was the final sentence that would be allowed. Then, silence. Not the uncomfortable kind anymore. Something else. Anticipatory stillness. Arnold looked up, not at Obama, not at the stage crew, not even at the audience directly. He scanned the room as if trying to identify each person by name, though he knew none of them. And then came the words. Slow. Even. Sharp. If unity means silence before the truth, he paused. Not for effect. For weight. So the sentence could fall. All the way down. Somewhere in the front, a girl's pencil snapped, just a soft, dry sound against her notebook. She didn't replace it. Arnold's voice returned. Quieter now. Then I'd rather be escorted out than bow my head. There was no music. No lights. But every ear felt it land. Like a gavel. Like a resignation. Like a vow. The line didn't ask for applause. It rejected the very idea of needing it. On stage, Barack Obama stood steady, but a small shift betrayed the silence. His eyes dropped, not to the floor in general, but to a very specific place, the bottom edge of the podium, where he usually stepped forward to shake hands after concluding a speech. That invisible mark on the floor that speakers know. The exit line. But this time, he didn't move. Not forward. Not back. Not anywhere. His fingers curled gently along the side of the lectern, like a man realizing he'd reached the end of a map and discovered there was no path drawn beyond it. The moment held. Not as drama, but as deadlock. Even the cameras didn't cut. The master broadcast feed held on a wide shot, Obama in the upper left third, Arnold in the lower right, separated by a gulf of moral tension, not space. A student near the center aisle finally exhaled audibly. Others didn't realize they had been holding their breath. In the corner of the control booth, A technician leaned over and whispered, "We've lost the room." But it wasn't noise. It wasn't chaos. It was the loss of narrative gravity. Nobody knew what was supposed to happen next. A man had just rejected the script, publicly, and the institution hadn't responded. Not with force. Not with words. Not even with guidance. Instead, they stood, facing each other. Not as enemies, but as proof that the stage had lost its final authority. Obama finally blinked. Not his eyes. His role. The audience, sensing it, didn't cheer. Didn't object. They waited. And in that waiting, the system cracked, not loudly, but clean. In row D, a student in a burgundy hoodie scribbled one line in their notes. This wasn't a confrontation. It was an unmasking. And yet, no mask had fallen. No one had yelled. But everyone saw it. At the edge of the platform, Arnold stood still. The envelope drooped slightly in his fingers now, not in weakness, but conclusion. He had said all he came to say. Not to win, but to make silence impossible. The cameras rolled. The techs held their breath. The president stared at a step he had taken 100 times before, and didn't take it this time. Because he knew, no matter what was said next, he would not be the one to end the scene. Morning light filtered through the upper windows of Lowell Hall's west corridor, pooling across the bulletin boards with soft indifference. Flyers for debate club tryouts, student elections, and Free Speech Week curled slightly at the corners under perfect strips of clean tape. Except one. Dead center on the board, slightly crooked, tilting about 30 degrees off axis, was a freshly printed piece of paper. The quote was short. Centered. No header. No footer. Just a line in bold type. If unity means silence before the truth, then I'd rather be escorted out than bow my head. Below it, nothing. No signature. No logo. No source attribution. It didn't need one. Anyone who had been in that room, or who had scrolled TikTok, Twitter, or watched the looped segment now running across 24 college news accounts, knew where it came from. The font wasn't Harvard standard. The alignment was off-center. And the tape was torn. A ragged triangle held the bottom left corner, while a longer strip across the top had started to peel away from the cork. No one had fixed it. No one dared to. The camera, low and slow, glided down the hallway, soundless but deliberate. Footsteps entered the frame. Not heavy. Not brisk. Measured. It was her. The same assistant from Chapter 2. The one who had looked to her iPad when Arnold stood. The one who confirmed to Obama, he's not registered. She wasn't wearing the headset this time. No clipboard. No badge. Just a canvas tote over one shoulder and a black windbreaker half-zipped. She paused about 3 feet from the board. Eyes locked on the crooked page. Her hand lifted slowly. Not robotic. Tentative. She reached for the paper. Not to read it. She already knew the words. Her fingers hovered above the top edge. Not clenched. Just poised. A subtle motion behind the eyes, calculation, but not protocol. She'd removed dozens of posters in this hallway. Event reschedules, unauthorized fundraisers, old band flyers. It was part of the job. But this one. Her fingers made contact with the edge of the tape. And stopped. She didn't flinch. Didn't gasp. Didn't look over her shoulder. She just paused. The camera held. There was no background music. No voiceover. Just the hum of morning, heat pipes, distant footsteps, a muffled door closing. After a few seconds, she let her hand fall to her side. Not reluctantly. Resignedly. She didn't nod. Didn't cry. She just stood there. Long enough for the weight of the act not taken to mean something. This wasn't rebellion. This wasn't endorsement. It was doubt, unmistakable, unfixable, and finally, visible. She stepped back. One pace. Then another. The paper stayed. Still crooked. Still fluttering slightly with hallway air. Still taped by imperfection. It didn't matter. It had been seen. And it hadn't been erased. The assistant turned slowly and walked away, never glancing back. The camera stayed locked on the paper. After 10 seconds, a student walked past, slowed, read the quote, and kept going. A second one took out their phone, snapped a photo, paused, then walked off in the opposite direction. No explanation. No reaction. Just echoes. Behind the glass of the board, the message remained, uncensored, unapproved, and unstopped. For the first time since the event, no one was controlling the narrative. Not to shut it down. Not to frame it cleanly. Not to make it part of something else. It just existed. Like the seat that remained empty. Like the hand that trembled. Like the moment the system reached for control, and didn't finish the gesture. And in that final, quiet image, one crooked page on a wall built for polished flyers, the institution blinked again. But this time, no one was watching. Only recording.